WHMB TV 40, Indianapolis.
So, brother, anytime you run up to me, brother husband, and say, my wife doesn't satisfy me, you know what you just said to me? I don't satisfy my wife. Because the moment you satisfy her, she satisfies you.
Pastor Jeffrey A. Johnson Sr. and the Eastern Star Baptist Church welcome you to Jewel Ministries. This television broadcast will bring you into our worship service where Jesus is exalted and the Word is explained. We encourage you now to worship God with us. If you have a need you would like someone to pray with you about, please call our prayer line at 317-591-5064. Thank you for joining us today.
There's a word from the Lord in the Song of Solomon. Song of Solomon, chapter 2, beginning with the first verse. Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. These words are recorded. I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys. As the lily among thorns, so is my love among the daughters. As the apple tree among the trees of the wood, so is my beloved among the sons. I sat down under his shadow with great delight, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. He brought me to the banqueting house, and his banner over me was love. Stay me with flagons, comfort me with apples, for I am sick of love. His left hand is under my head, and his right hand doth embrace me. I charge you, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes and by the hinds of the field, that ye stir not up nor awake my love till he please. Verse 4 says, he brought me to the banqueting house, and his banner over me was love. And his banner over me was love. I want to talk about the signs of love. The signs of love. Every now and then when I hang out with my young sons, we run into strangers that we meet and greet. And as I am there with my young sons, those persons that we just meet will begin to ask my sons, what do you plan to do when you grow up? What do you plan to do when you become an adult? And so my sons begin to call off the things they plan to do when they mature, when they grow up, when they become adults. And so Jay Allen speaks of his career in the NFL, as well as preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. And Jordy proceeds to tell them that in 12 years, when he is 19, that he will be in the NBA, as well as preaching the gospel. And Jalen begins to speak of how he will be a police officer. As he begins to tell, they begin to tell what they plan to do when they grow up. And then those strangers, those persons that we just meet and greet, will then go on to ask me, what am I doing? And I begin to tell them that I'm a Christian, I'm a child of God. I've received Jesus Christ into my life for forgiveness of sin. But I'm also a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and I pastor one of the greatest churches in the world. And I tell them what I am doing, as my sons tell them what they plan to do. And herein lies the difference between immaturity and maturity. Immature people are always planning to do, and mature people are already doing. And this is true in any walk of life, even when it comes to Christianity and the Church of Jesus Christ. That is the difference between, that's how you can tell the difference between a carnal Christian and a spirit-filled Christian. Immature Christians begin to speak of what they plan to do. I plan to attend church more. I plan to get more involved. I plan to start being active in ministry. I plan to start giving more. I plan to start tithing. I plan to participate in what God is doing. Immature Christians are always planning to do. Spirit-filled Christians are already doing. This is true in any walk of life, even when it comes to relationships. There are those of us who try to enter into mature relationships prematurely because we are still immature. Immature people are always planning to do. Sisters, be careful of getting into a serious, mature relationship with a man who talks about what he plans to do. I plan to get a job, and I plan to go to work. I plan to pay my bills, and I plan to be more responsible, and I plan to give accountability. I plan to offer security. Immature men are always planning to do. Mature men are already doing what others talk about doing. This is true in every walk of life, and I say that because there are those of us who have the mind for marriage, but don't have the maturity for marriage. And you just need to wait until you've matured and are able to handle the responsibility, accountability, and security that comes in a marital relationship. All of this is tied in with what we're dealing with in the Song of Solomon, chapter 2. It opens up with these special people speaking of themselves and each other. Here is a special person in verse 1. She is speaking to her husband about the kind of person that she is. She says, I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys. I am the rose of Sharon. Notice she doesn't say, I am the bud of Sharon. This is a woman who has already blossomed. This is a woman who has already bloomed. This is a woman who has already matured. And since she has matured, she is able to handle the mentality that is necessary when it comes to marriage. She didn't say, I'm a bud of Sharon. I am the rose of Sharon. This is very important to have this kind of maturity. Sharon in this text, the rose of Sharon, Sharon was an area of land that was between Mount Carmel and Joppa. It was a smooth area. It was the plains between Mount Carmel and Joppa. It was a very fertile area. It was a beautiful area of land, very fertile, even in the sense that those caught up in agriculture took advantage of the fact it was so fertile. So fertile that it was so beautiful that wildflowers and other flowers would spring up with its beauty. And even the chief among flowers, the rose, was there. In the midst of all of that beauty and the smoothness and the plainness that was between Mount Carmel and Joppa, she says, I am mature. And thank God for her maturity, because things do not stay smooth always in relationships. That's why it goes from the rose of smooth Sharon to the lily of the valleys. And anytime you have a valley, there have to at least be two mountains. So you have the plains of Sharon, you have the valley and a mountainous area. And then she talks about in verse 3, the woods, the forests, the dense woods. Now this is important because relationships have a way of changing grounds. Terrain changes. Things may start off smooth, but don't be so immature to think that just because your relationship starts off smooth that you won't run into some valleys. As a matter of fact, anybody that's been married for longer than a half a verse know you'll have some valley situations. And for you to think that things are always going to be smooth and you will not have mountains and diswooded areas and valley situations is a sign of your own immaturity. For you to say, well, that's never going to happen. We're never going to get down. Problems are never going to come. You're not living in the real world, and you need to grow up before you make a marital decision. So she has maturity, but something else about her, and that is the fact that she also has purity. I am the lily of the valley. It speaks of her purity and it speaks of her beauty. The lily of the valleys. That is a term that oftentimes we use to represent Jesus Christ. And we speak of him as being the lily of the valley. But the text doesn't say lily of the valley. It says lily of the valleys, because more than one thing can get you down. Sometimes the job can get you down. Sometimes your career can get you down. Sometimes business decisions can get you down. Sometimes your marriage, sometimes your family, sometimes your own children, sometimes your finance, sometimes romance. There are a number of things that can get you down. But if you have the maturity as a rose in Sharon, you can hold on to your purity as a lily in the valley. Because mature people know valley situations will take place in my life. But even though I am in the valley, that is not my final destination. Mature people know I can hold on to my purity because I'm not going to be in this valley always. You want to know what's wrong with some of us? We are pure in a mountaintop experience, but we are perverted in the valley. So we allow our disposition to be determined by our location. So depending upon where I am determines whether or not I'm pure. That's why some of us are holy at church and hellish everywhere else, because our disposition is determined by our location. But I want y'all to understand something. Just because you're in a valley now doesn't mean you're going to stay in that valley. Just because you go through some troubles now doesn't mean you're going to stay in those troubles. You don't have to give up and throw in the towel and hold up the white flag of surrender. Listen to what David said. Yea, though I walk. See, mature Christians know it took a change to get me in this situation. It will take a change to get me out. So I got to learn how to do like Job. All the days of my appointed time, I'm going to wait till my change comes. But now while you're in the midst of the valley, you got to do like David. What did he do? He kept on walking. Because if you stop walking in your valley, you'll never come through it. But if you keep putting one foot in front of the other, if you just stay with the Lord, keep following after the shepherd, you're going to pass through your valley. Do I have a witness in this place? Now, let me tell you something. Don't try to run through your valley, because God knows you can't handle that pace. I know you want to come out quickly, but you can't run through it because you don't have what it takes to run at that pace. But if you can just take one day at a time and walk through that valley, baby, God has a way of bringing you through. Do I have a witness in this place? Yea, though I walk through the valley, I'm the lily of the valley. She holds on to her maturity, beauty, and purity, even in the midst of down times. And then listen to what her man said about her, this special person. He said, not only are you the lily in the valley, he said, you're a lily among thorns. He says, so is my love among the daughters of Jerusalem. He says, you're like, when I compare you to the other women in society, to me, you are like a lily among thorns. Lily among thorns? That is an unusual place, y'all, for a lily to grow. Among thorns. But here is a woman who gave color to her environment rather than her environment giving color to her. See, this man says, you're not the first woman I took out. You're not my first date. You're not the first person I had an experience with. You're not the first woman I have experienced. But when I compare you to the other women, that you are like a lily among thorns. He is saying, I have been in some relationships that were choking. Some relationships that were so choking to me, it's almost like taking my breath away. He says, I've been in some piercing predicaments in some of my relationships. I've been in some sticky situations. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. There's some women who literally choke the life out of you in those kind of piercing relationships, in those sticky situations. And instead of becoming the apple of your eye, they became the thorn in your flesh. He said, but you're not like that. You're like a lily among thorns. Now, she wasn't so stuck up that she didn't think she couldn't be around anybody. She's around the thorns, but she doesn't become thorny. She lives in the world, but she is not of the world. She colored her environment rather than allowing her environment to color her. She made a difference in the predicament and the situation she found herself in. Well, y'all don't seem to be getting this. Let me use one of my friend's illustrations. Pastor Freddie Haynes tells an illustration about this man that purchased this house. And when he purchased the house, no one had lived in it for a while, and it was a nice, beautiful, big home. And as he was walking through the house, he looked in the backyard through the window and discovered a lot of weeds in the backyard, and thorns and bristles, and just a lot of tears and weeds that were growing up in the backyard. But in the midst of that unkept yard, he saw a rose in the middle of the weeds. And this man who had just purchased his house was so impressed with that rose in the middle of those weeds, and he was wondering, how could this rose grow among tares? And he went into the backyard and he pushed his way through those weeds and came up on that rose and began to follow the vine of the rose. And the vine of that rose led him to the yard next door, where there was an immaculate garden, this beautiful garden. And he discovered that the reason why that rose could grow among the weeds was because it was rooted in another garden. Oh, y'all don't seem to understand what I'm saying in this place. Already know that you got to go to certain jobs where there are ungodly folk, and go to school where you got thorny people, and go in the midst of your business situations where there are thorny people, and you got to go in your community. Some of us even got to go home where there are thorny people. But how can a rose grow in the midst of thorns and weeds? You got to be rooted in another garden. How can I be a saint in the midst of sinners, rooted in another garden? How can I be holy in the midst of hellishness, rooted in another garden? The next time somebody asks you, how can you hold on to your righteousness in the midst of all of this wretchedness? Tell them, I'm in the world, but I'm not of this world. I'm rooted in another garden. He said, you're like a lily among thorns. And in spite of what other folk were doing around her, she was still able to hold on to her purity, her beauty, and her maturity. But now listen to what she says about him in verse 3. Song of Solomon 2 and 3. Now this is a special woman, and you know what she does? She hooks up with a special man. Why is it that we can recognize what we have, but somehow we are not able to pick up on what somebody else has? And I say that because what happens is you get a special woman who hooks up with a crazy man. Y'all know what I'm talking about. You get a special man, he hooks up with a crazy woman. Why is it crazy folk are interested in special people? And then some of us end up in relationships that we should not be in because we don't recognize it takes two mature people to have a marriage. Oh, I know I'm telling the truth in this place. So watch the special person that she gets. It says, as an apple tree among the trees of the wood, so is my beloved among the sons. He has a distinction himself. And he has a distinction in spite of his location. It's an apple tree, this apple tree. Now look this word up, because during this time, apple trees really did not grow in this area. And actually out of the Hebrew, as this was translated into English in the 17th century with the King James Version, out of the Hebrew, apple tree there is a citron tree. This is citrus fruit. Trees that bear citrus fruit, things like in the orange family or the tangerine family or the grapefruit family. And she begins to speak of how he is like a fruit tree in the forest. Now, I was never a member of the 4-H club and all that kind of stuff. I don't know a lot about agriculture, but it just doesn't seem natural and normal for a fruit tree to be in the forest. And it would seem to me that this man has a distinction in spite of his location, that he can grow fruit and produce fruit in areas where other trees cannot. Ooh, I wish y'all could see this today, y'all. He is different from the other trees. He's in the same place. He works on the same job. He lives in the same community. He's up against the same injustice. He has to deal with the same racism. He's dealing with the same ungodliness, but he is able to produce even in the midst where other trees are barren. This is a fruit tree in the forest. You would think it would be easy to be a fruit tree in the orchard. I mean, it's easy to be an apple tree in the orchard. It's easy to be an orange tree in the orchard, a tangerine tree in the orchard, but can you bear fruit in the forest? Y'all don't seem to be getting it. Let me see if I can make it clear. It's easy to be a Christian at church, where other trees are bearing fruit. Come on. Where other folk express love and joy and peace and long-suffering and gentleness and meekness and self-control and faith, where you have other folk who are operating in the fruit of the Spirit. But can you be a Christian on your job? I mean, anybody can praise God's name at church, but can you be a Christian in your own ungodly home? And can you be a Christian in your own ungodly neighborhood and in your own ungodly school? Because anybody can bear fruit in an orchard, but it takes a person of distinction that in spite of their location, that I can be a fruit tree even in the forest. And that's important too, because some of us, it just depends on where we are as to what we produce. We have what I call a thermometric relationship with God. Thermometric. You know what a thermometer is. A thermometer is that which is controlled by its environment. So that if it gets hot in here, the mercury in a thermometer goes up. If it gets cold, the mercury in a thermometer goes down. So that this thermometer is up or down depending upon its environment. It is controlled by the environment which it is in. Some of us have a thermometric relationship when it comes to God and other folk. It just depends upon what environment we're in as to how we act and behave. So when we're around holy people, we act holy. When we're around hellish folk, we act hellish. When we're with righteous folk, we're righteous. When we're with wretched folk, we're wretched. Our environment controls us, so that when I'm at church, I sing spiritual songs. But when I'm in another environment, I sing sexual songs, sordid sexual songs in the midst of ungodliness. I turn into what I am around. Some of us, when we at church, well, we just love the Lord, praise God. He's so wonderful, he's holy. We speak in other tongues, and when we get around other folk, we speak in other tongues. We take on the environment of the atmosphere. Relationships can be so disturbing. Smooth one day, hilly next day, valley next day, dense woods the next day. Go through so many things. But I'm so glad that no matter what I go through, that as long as I got Jesus Christ in my life, I can handle it, I can deal with it. Instead of trying to get under the shade of some man's tree, it's time for us to get under the tree of Calvary's cross. It's time to get saved and get a relationship with God through his son, Jesus Christ. No matter what you've done in the past, he will save you right now by your putting your faith in him. And then it's time to stay under that shadow, to stay close to the cross. You need a church home where you can grow and develop as a child of God. We want you to know that you are welcome.